That's great. Thank you, Lisa. And thanks, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. So as Lisa says, thank you for that introduction. I'm the co-founder of PS Media, which is a collaborative local news startup that we're piloting our model in 3 communities in Australia this year. I've also been doing this consultancy work over the last couple of years for Google News Initiative. In 2020, I worked with 5 regional publishers, gave me a great insight into kind of some of the challenges that established publishers face. And then the work, the group I was involved with Judah Nielsen Institute, which is going to lead to something hopefully in the local news space for to represent organizations. That work is concluded, but that was very illuminating as well. I worked for the Times of London initially, and then for News Corp Australia in a number of roles, including in regional Australia. And then, as Lisa said, I was at BuzzFeed. So I'm going to talk to you very briefly today. I've got, I think, 15 minutes, and I'm going to talk to you around some insights from some recent research that PS Media has conducted with the University of Canberra. So I'm just going to share my screen. I hope you can all see that okay. So we were basically looking in this research to really understand local news consumer behavior, understand how people perceive the existing news provision that they have, and in particular to get a sense of what appetite consumers may have for new models like ours or other models that we may hear about a bit later today. This is PS Media's model. Effectively, we're a collaborative model for local news. We want this to be co-created and co-owned by the communities that we serve. It's profit for purpose rather than not for profit. We're building a piece of technology, and ultimately our plan is that this will be, very local to you and individual to you, but as we build out mastheads, we'll create an ecosystem of kind of collaboration around the impact of our work and the solutions we do. And then also, the key other aspect is that this is yours. We want to build this with Australia. We want it to be co-designed, co-created, and ultimately co-owned by the communities that we serve. So I was really interested as I tried to sort of think about this model, about what was happening in regional Australia, and what we've seen in the digital news report is generally, as we've heard, a real deterioration in audiences in providers from local media. We saw that with Anna Draffin's latest PG data. And so, that trend is very worrying, and particularly that trend, as you can see here, is really, being pretty catastrophic at the regional level. So in 2020, I did a big report with the Google News Initiative support that the University of Canberra did, and we looked at 2,000. We spoke to 2,000 people in 20 LGAs around, in 50 LGAs around Australia, and we got some really interesting insights there, which are, that 19% at that stage, and this is prior to the pandemic. This data was gathered prior to the huge kind of wave of closures we saw there in the first part of 2020. But before that, 20% had experienced a closure of a masthead in their location. 62% of those surveys felt that closure had had a really negative effect on their community. So they could see the connection between local news and community kind of cohesion or connectivity. And 46% felt there was a real reduction in the availability of local news. And of course, local information, the local newspaper often plays a crucial role in connecting community. Without it there, or with a reduction in the service, or with a newsroom that maybe is located elsewhere that's providing local news, people really are struggling to have insights into the kind of key issues that they need to day to day. So those are all kind of really concerning numbers. And then overall, like I said, this feels that generally people in this measured data say that there's a lack of kind of belonging to their community, and that feels that maybe the role that newspapers have historically played is a little bit invisible, but it's crucial actually in terms of connecting them, letting them understand what's happening in their local community, what's happening with local schools or local sports, or in particular like what's happening with local government. And people, without that being reported, don't necessarily know about what those in power are kind of doing on their behalf. And also they don't see their stories and their local stories, their local perspectives in the national and international stories kind of reflected in local media. So, this is, we think, a really kind of worrying longer term trend. Obviously predated the pandemic, but in Australian terms, really kind of picked up then in the last couple of years. Encouragingly for PS Media, what we did find that in those communities which had lost a paper or had a real reduction in service, there was a willingness, a pretty significant willingness. A third of people said that they would be interested in supporting and financially supporting local news online if it was available to them. And I think that's that sense of maybe they didn't notice necessarily, they didn't necessarily buy the news before, but then when it wasn't there, they noticed the gap and they then were interested in looking at ways of supporting local news. This is much higher than the average. So the average in Australia is that 14% of us are paying for digital news. People increasingly, of course, are just relying on all the free news that's out there, but that's usually commoditized news. It's usually national or international. And on the local level, certainly from PS Media's perspective and for people on this call today, this is the really crucial areas. What's happening at the local level, what's happening in regional. So this is exciting, 29%, willingly to consider new models versus the 14% people currently paying. So the latest research that we've just done in recent weeks is a number of focus groups that I conducted with the help of Canary Yellow Squares, and again with the University of Canberra, who are amazing partners, and Caroline and Sora and Angie at the News and Media Research Centre. I just want to say thank you very much for supporting this work, because it's been incredibly illuminating. So we were looking at three major themes. Each week we conducted six LGAs, 3 focus groups that ran for 3 days each, so 9 days in total, looking each day at different issues, looking at the local news environment, looking at the community's engagement with issues. What are the issues facing them? What's their perception of the different levels of government? And also what's the role and impact of organizations, some of the organizations that Natalie was talking about with the FRRR. What's the role that community organizations play in addressing these issues? Really getting a sense of how well served they were by other pathways for information than news. And then we looked in particular at suggesting some new business models, trying to understand how they understood journalism, how they understand impact, and also their willingness to participate in the editorial process, which for PS Media is really crucial because we have this kind of collaborative model for local news. And so this is a lot of information. We're still digesting it. It just happened over the last couple of weeks. It's been very illuminating. And I'm just going to share a couple of things with you now. So these were the locations that we looked at, 6 LGAs, 60 people in the focus groups in each of the LGAs. And we grouped them into 3 actually by geographic. So we had Bega Valley and East Gippsland together, Northwest Tas and WA together, and the Eyre Peninsula and Gladstone together. And they were really, really fascinating and insightful. These are the top line insights we learned. So 42% overall said that their local information needs are not being met. So this is bang up to date data from January this year. 50% felt that government should be helping to fund local journalism. There were lots of nuances to that insight. Lots of people felt government should have nothing to do with news. Other people felt that it was essential because otherwise how would they know what's happening in their local council? And 22% said consumers should be paying for local news. So this is a bigger number again than that 14%. And then really encouragingly for PS Media, we found that there's a real appetite for new models, for new approaches to kind of replace the newspaper. So our model is a profit for purpose model. We find strong support for that. We are wanting people to collaborate with us to do this, and we found support for that, 32%. And then also there's an interest in community co-ownership. Our model is around going deeper than membership and subscription and asking a small percentage, nowhere near 20%, just a few percent in each community to put their hands up and to become co-owners of our masthead. We looked at these issues over these 3 days, and these are just a couple of very top line insights from these. We looked at people's perceptions of local reporting as it existed. Generally, the findings were that it was poor and uneven coverage of local issues across the board. We certainly, in these focus groups, there were not areas where there'd been a complete loss of papers. There'd been a deterioration. I think one of the 6 LGAs had lost its paper, but otherwise it was just a deterioration. But they felt that it was definitely poor and uneven coverage, a lack of in-depth. A lot of people cited that there used to be much more detail in reporting. We know that. We knew newsrooms have shrunk significantly, 5,000 fewer journos, 50% fewer journos working now than 10 years ago. And people can see that and feel it, in the news provision that's there. And then people increasingly, of course, relying on social media for better or for worse. And so people saying that they were relying on social media for COVID information for better or worse, that they felt that, that they didn't necessarily have, a very accurate or, detailed response from local media as and when it was there. So that was really interesting. Some top line things are around, some people, interestingly, really happy to live in kind of bubbles and be quite isolated from news. Other people, and this is a strong finding that we saw borne out in some of the research we heard from Jonathan, that people in the UK, as in Australia, really trust local news much more than national news generally, which is really interesting and I think encouraging for all of us who are running or attempting to run mastheads in local areas. So a big kind of interest in the local news provision, but again, like some frustration within it. In terms of payment, people, of course, as we know, only 14% of people are paying currently. They're increasingly looking for free over paid, but that's challenging. Obviously, it's easy to access, Canberra news or national news because there's a business model that is supporting it. Although even that business model is under pressure. At the local level, it's really difficult to support local news with shrinking budgets and so much of the advertising moving over to the internet. People did find, though, that they were very frustrated about hitting paywalls. We heard that so many times. Incredibly frustrating, steer clear of them. How dare they put in a paywall was something that someone said. And so I think this is really interesting and very interesting to hear Evan Smith from the Texas Tribune talking about, how paywall, if you're trying to serve the public, you should not have a paywall. But obviously we know that mostly for ACM, for News Local, for 7 West, there's a hard paywall. And I think, that's excluding a big percentage of the population who maybe cannot afford or are very frustrated by that. Lots and lots of people get frustrated with the increasing advertising papers and the lack of kind of coverage, much less local coverage. Maybe the paper hasn't changed too much in size, but so much of it is coming from a metro, partner title. It's all kind of state news, all national news, very little local news. They find it really frustrating. And then this hard paywall. This very colourful comment that a Carmel commentator said was that they shit me to tears. People really, they're angry. It's a pressure point. And I think it's really damaging that there's not ways for people to access local news really without paywalls. PS Media is absolutely free to access for everyone, of course. And then, why should people pay? Some people felt strongly that they should. We saw that. So people say, I want to know what's going on, but other people are saying, yes, of course we should pay. We pay for other things, but there should be accessibility, and this is where the call for government to maybe support came in. That perhaps people who cannot afford, the $35 a month or whatever they would be paying for a digital news subscription for their local masthead, how would they access the news? Maybe the government should be involved in some kind of way. So really interesting insights there. And then in terms of asking, 42% said that the local news needs weren't being met. But of course, that means that 58% of people said that their news was being met. So this was interesting. And I think that it's not absolutely terrible. Some people are frustrated. Other people think it's okay. But again, people are saying, we want to know more. We want to rely more on the news provider with professional journalists and social media. So much of it is coming, from these national players rather than locally. So people looking for higher quality local news, I think, generally. And we asked across the board, people, what are the kind of key issues that are facing you? And so, there was lots and lots of insight into, all the connectivity issues that people face in regional Australia, all the housing pressure issues that people face, all the lack of jobs, the kind of ice epidemics, the huge amounts of issues and frustration. And, these are important, real issues that people face every day. And they don't have a paper necessarily going into bat for them or surfacing these issues or holding those in power accountable. This feels like a big problem that people identified. So this is just a sample of some of the issues people are facing. You can see that hospitals, medical access, medical care, infrastructure generally, like connectivity, all big issues that people were facing. So that's basically it. I think I'm pretty much out of time, really lightning fast. I can send this deck to anybody who's interested. There will be a report that's coming from the University of Canberra, just in a couple of weeks, I think, or at some stage in the future. So, sign up for updates at psmedia.com.au. Email me directly if you want to have more insight. I'll just leave you with this idea of impact. PS Media is around trying to actually measure the impact of what we're doing journalistically. This is really important to us. So we're building a piece of technology and creating a journalism and engagement model that tracks what impact is, journalistic impact, impact on people's lives. And so it was really interesting for us getting this sense of how do people define impact from a journalistic sense, and a huge range of issues there. So, stay tuned. We're going to be sharing much more about our plans in coming weeks. And later on today, you can hear from me on a panel with other people doing innovation in the local space. And I'm excited to be involved in that one. Okay, that's me. Thanks a lot.